Hello guys, welcome into another Django tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to cover weather application. We are going to use OpenWeather API for us to capture the weather patterns of a certain place, then display that weather in this application. So let's have a quick demo of what we are going to build. For example, I can search for a city like Nairobi, then press enter. Then I'm going to see all these details down here. For example, I'm going to see the country code, the coordinates, temperature, pressure, humidity, forecast, and description. So these are some of the details that we are going to do. We are also going to build this beautiful user interface over here. For the user interface, we are going to use Bootstrap and HTML to build this beautiful UI. We can also search for another place like London. Then you can see it's going to give us the country code and all the other details and saying it's raining at this particular time. We are searching for this location. We can search for a different place like Cairo. Then we can see Cairo is cloudy at the moment of recording this tutorial. So that's exactly what we are going to build. What are the tools that we are going to need to build this application? You're only going to need the OpenWeather API. Just go to OpenWeather API, OpenWeather map, then go to your APIs, create an account, then go to my APIs or my API keys. Then you are going to see the default API key. You can decide to generate your own API key, then do away with the default API key. Another tool that we are going to use is Python Django. Just the normal way that you write Django, this is exactly what we are going to be using. So let's get into it. For you to get started with Django, make sure that virtual environment is already installed in your machine. Then if your virtual environment is already installed, then I can run virtual environment, virtual env, then the project name. Let's call our project OpenWeather _YT. Then let's wait for it to create. Once your project has been created or the virtual environment has already been created, then navigate to that code. I'm going to cd OpenWeather IT. Then now I'm going to continue creating the other things. So what am I going to do here? I like using Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. Then I'm going to continue everything here from our Visual Studio Code like this. So I'm going to open my terminal, Ctrl J, Command J for a shortcut. Then I'm going to collapse this. Then here is where now I'm going to continue to do the other things. So because you have already installed virtual environment here, run scripts. So let's check the directory that we are in, and we can see here we have scripts. So now I can run scripts /activate. Then after this, now I can now install pip install Django for this project. Let's wait for it to install. After it's done installing, now we can do the other process. The other process is basically simple. Run the command Django admin start project, then we can call it my site, the default one that we are used to. Then let's wait for it to create. Now after it's done creating, let's navigate to cd my site. Then we can test our application if it's up and running. How do we go about that? So we are going to run python manage.py, then run server, And once we run our server, we can see our application is up and running. So the next step that we need to do, let's stop our server at this moment because we no longer needed it now. I want us to continue building the other part. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an app still inside my site. I'm going to run another command here, python manage.py, python manage.py, start app. Then I'm going to call it OpenWeather. OpenWeather, you can just call it the same name, OpenWeather YT. Then after I'm done this, after creating this now, I can make sure that to go to my settings, go to your files and then go to your settings. Just identify where your settings file are. Then over here, you can register your application inside your installed apps. So here you are going to type the exact name that we have given to our OpenWeather YT here. So OpenWeather _YT. And just like that, we have registered our OpenWeather application. So the next thing that we are going to do, we are going now to set up our front end, that is the HTML for this particular project. So where are we going to set up our HTML? We are going to set up our templates here inside OpenWeather. So let's create a directory here and call it templates. Then inside our templates, we are going to create index.html file. And inside here is where we are going to create our HTML file that is going to show the front end of this application. Now, once we are done creating our HTML, now we can go ahead and work with our views. We can create views that they are going to render this page on our browser. So how do we go about that? But before we create that, I want us to create a different URLs. In these URLs, they will help you now. What if you add a different applications over here? You add OpenWeather, you have another application. So it's a good practice to create URLs for each of these projects. So inside here, OpenWeather here, I'm going to create inside this OpenWeather here, I'm going to create urls.py. I'm going to include all the URLs that I need over here. For example, I'm going to do my normal way, or the normal way of importing Django URLs, and in which is Django.urls. Then import path. Then import path. Then, because I'm also going to need views, I'm going to do from or import views. Then inside here, I'm now going to render my URLs over here. So we are going to call them URL patterns. Then I'm going to make this a list, and then I'm going to pass the path over here. Then this path is going to redirect to our home page, and in which our home page we have views.index. Now this views.index, we are going to create this view for index. For example, for the views.index, let's prepare the views index. Then we pass our request. Then after we pass our request over here, then here is where we are going to return. We are going to return render. Inside our views, we are going to return render. Then we are going to render the request Then after you render the request, now you can render the index.html file that we just created. Now this view here that we are defining here is this view index that we are trying to use over here. Now that's it all for these secondary views that we have created. But remember, all these views need to be mapped into one place. All these URLs need to be mapped in one place. So how do we go about it? Go to my site, then in our primary URLs, inside here, add include, then over here, now we are going to use the URLs that we have created over here. So how do we add this? We add a path, then inside this path, it's going to route to home page. Then after it routes to home page, it's going to include. It's going to include all the URLs that we need over here. So which URLs is it including? It's included in the weather, in the OpenWeather, not weather, in the OpenWeather _YT dot URLs. So what it's doing here, it's going to our OpenWeather app, in which is this case OpenWeather YT. Then it goes and fetches all the URLs that we have defined here. Then it maps all the URLs over here. That's exactly what it's all doing. So with that said and done, so let's continue now and try to create our weather application, or we try to create our views over here. So how do we go about the views? What do we need? What kind of data do we need? We need to fetch the API. Then after we fetch the API, we also need to render that API to the browser, and then we fetch that JSON file, then render that data to the browser. So before we create that, we need several things over here. We need libraries like import JSON, because we are going to use this data in form of JSON. We are going to return this data in form of JSON. Then we are also going to import URLlib, which is a library dot request. In this one is going to help us fetch the API and then render it on the browser. So in this API here, so let's do this. Before we start creating our views, let's test our application if it's up and running. How do we test our application? Back to our terminal, it's going to be python manage.py run server, and we can see our server is up and running. So let's go and test our application in the browser. Click this link or copy this link and then paste it on your browser. Come here and refresh, and we can see that we have rendered our first text. So now what we need is now adding the views and adding more HTML code over here. So I'm going to paste some HTML code in, which you don't need to write. It's very basic HTML. Then you can just write the HTML, and I will provide the GitHub repository for that. You can copy the HTML and paste it, then use that HTML and understand what is going on. Now here, I'm going to replace this HTML with this HTML that we have, and we can see from our browser, if we refresh, now we have this OpenWeather. But the moment that we strike or we search for anything, it's not returning anything because we have not hooked our API with our code. Now let's go back to our code in our views and then start creating the views for that. We have said we need an OpenWeather API that is going to help us capture this data, then show it on the browser. So we are going to write an if statement over here. Then if the request dot method is equal to post, we need a method of post because we are going to have an input field that is going to request data or is going to send the request. Then here we define a variable city because we are going to search this data with the city or the title of the city. So the request dot post dot get the request dot post, in which this one is a list here. Then you are going to pass the variable city here. Then after this, now here we are going to define another variable that is going to fetch the API, or where we are going to use our API endpoint. So we need URL lib, the URL lib dot request dot URL open dot URL open, then into brackets. Here is where now we are going to need our API endpoint. So I've added the source over here, URL lib dot request dot URL open, then paste the API endpoint over here. Then here pass the request that is going to be the city that we are going to type. Then over here app ID is equal to this API key over here. So for the API ID over here, just go to your OpenWeather, then copy this API key. Then in this API key, you are going to add it over here. Then this one, it's going to be a function that is going to be read like this. Then now we can continue to render the other applications. So we can write another variable over here and say list of data. The list of data that we are going to have is JSON that we define loads that is going to load the source of that particular data. Now we have defined all this particular data. Now we need the data itself. The data itself is going to be this particular data. In this data, the country code, in which is going to be a key value pair, and this data we are going to convert it into a form of a string. Then we pass our variable that we defined here, the list of data. Then this one here, we add the sys, and I'm going to show you where exactly this data is coming from, or these words are coming from. Then over here, I'm going to add the country. Because this is an if statement. An if statement expects an else block. What if this data exists? Then fetch the data and then show the data. What if the data does not exist? Define that variable data, then assign it to an empty. Then over here we are going to pass the data as well. So far so good. We can test our application and see how far it is. Let's go to our browser, then just refresh. Then we can type a particular city, then press enter. Then we can't see any particular output over here. So we are going to complete all the other parts of this application, then show the data. I only return the country over here. So also let me copy this particular data, still the same format, and then I'm going to show you how it works. I've copied this particular data over here. Then this is how it's going to work out. So one more twist in the urls.py here as we complete this session. So over here, I'm going to add several things. I'm going to import various things over here. Django.config import settings, then Django.url static import the static. Because at some point we may have some static images or static files that are being loaded by our application. After that, I'm going to add another piece of code over here. Then this is the moment we are going to test our application. So let's load our application once more. Then over here, now we can search for a city, and we can see that the data has been returned over here. So that is exactly what we are going to build. To get the code, check the description below to get the source code of this application. To get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you, and see you in the next one.